How many of you are ready for a challenging message today? If so, on the count of 3, I want to ask you just to say, bring it. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Bring it. Say it again. 1, 2, 3. Bring it. All right, you asked for it, so here it goes. I want to just start by taking a mass survey this morning here at Crosspoint. How many of you today would raise your hand and you say that you plan on committing adultery one day? Would you just raise your hand really high? How many of you singles plan on, getting married, popping out a few kids, then getting a bitter, ugly divorce? Divorce, raise your hand high. Anybody? You know, what's interesting is that according to statistics, half of you in the room are going to do both. More than half of you will commit adultery. Around half will end up divorced. And people ask, why? Why does this happen? Because nobody goes in saying that we're going to do this, right? Nobody raised their hand. You know, there's the big 3 reasons why relationships don't last and why marriages don't last. Communication, money, and sex. Now, in this series, we're going to deal with all 3 of those, but today, we're going to deal with the big one of sex. And sex is appropriate to talk about here in the church this weekend. And the reason why is because everybody is talking about sex right now. Why? Because of this new movie that just premiered this past weekend, a little something of 50 Shades of Grey. And on Thursday, every Thursday, I usually shoot a video with Dallas. And I'll put a video out to our church. And if you want to get on that, just sign up on your connection card. And I'm going to do a video in 2 weeks on how to talk to your daughter about sex. And then in 3 weeks, I'm going to do one on how to talk to your son about sex. So if you're interested in that, just sign up on your connection card and you can be able to get on that. But this week, I'm thinking, what am I going to talk about? I'm like, I usually try to talk about whatever everybody else is talking about. So I'm like, you know what? Right now, people are talking about 50 Shades of Grey. So I just thought, well, all right, here we go. I've never read the book. I haven't seen the movie, but from my understanding, it's this powerful man who allures this woman and dominates this woman. And as I've read both sides of the story, I read the Christian stuff, and about half of it, I'm like, what are you talking about? Kind of throw it away, right? Then I read the secular stuff, and I'm like, all right, they've never read the Bible, so I get why they're talking the way that they're talking. And there's this fine line in the controversy of this film, and here's the fine line. Consensual, abusive. Here's a man using his influence to be able to sexually get what he wants from this young woman. And I couldn't help, and I don't want to inflict guilt on anybody. I realize some of you are sitting in the room, you've already seen the movie with your girlfriend, you guys have already had the conversation. Right now, you're already in church, you feel guilty about it. That's why you came to church, you got to purify yourself. But I also recognize some of you are here right now, and you're debating, should I go see the movie, should I not? I'm not, Shannon's not, we're not. I've decided to do something different. You know, as Christians, we can curse the darkness, and we can talk about how bad the world is and how awful everything is. We can curse the darkness, or we can light a candle. So I choose to light a candle. So on Thursday, God gave me this little idea. I just thought, I can't help but think about sexually abused women right now. And so I called the Sheepfold. And the Sheepfold is an organization here in North Orange County that helps women that have been abused. That are in abusive situations, helps them and their children, and they have homes all over North Orange County. And as a matter of fact, many of our growth groups, I've gone before with my group, and we'll go and we'll paint these houses, and then after we paint these houses, then what we'll do is we will we'll help clean up, we'll do whatever is needed. So I called John over there. Here, before you put that on the screen, take that off, Bill. I'll talk about it in a second. I called John and I said, John, so what's your take on this whole 50 Shades of Grey? And he said, well, let me tell you one story. So they sent me over this story about this woman right now, currently, at the Sheepfold. She came to us like many women do, broken down and overwhelmed. She'd been in a 7-year relationship with a very abusive man. As she revealed more and more of her story, it's obvious she didn't understand that she was experiencing was abuse until she came to us. She openly shared with us, he used to manipulate me into doing things with him that I didn't want to do. And sexually, I was very frightened of him. She then shared, he would force me to watch porn with him and tell me if I didn't, he would expose our young son to it. He would then require me to act out what we had seen on screen. It was both humiliating and painful. In fact, she mentioned, I think my boyfriend has exposed my children to some sexual things, and I'm concerned that they might start acting it out as well. Now, this wasn't something that started when they first met, but most likely it was there just hidden. It didn't just happen overnight. Her abuser, John said, took his time breaking her down so that he could have the power and the control over her. He manipulated her into the fantasy he saw on the screen, but it never satisfied him. He always wanted something more extreme, and he slowly got more and more abusive. And it wasn't until he was choking her during a sexual act that she realized she needed to get out. That's a woman who just recently came into the sheepfold. I believe this whole 50 Shades of Grey thing is a slippery slope. And we can curse the darkness, or we can light a candle. So what I'm going to challenge you to do, what Shannon and I are going to do, is we're going to take our $10 that we would have spent going to see the movie, and we're actually going to give it to the sheepfold. And here's how I'm going to do it today. We're going to text to give. So you can actually text to give right now through your phone. Here at Crosspoint Church, we encourage you to use your phones. A lot of churches, they tell you to like silence your phones and turn off your phones. We tell you to turn them on. Tweet, share, Facebook, take notes. Just try not to take too many calls in the service. That'll help, okay? But saying that, if you want to text, here's how you text to be able to give. We're giving 100% of all the money that comes in through our text giving to the sheepfold. You can text the words "Give Crosspoint $10," or you can choose the amount to 34444. There's 4 4s. If you'll text that number right now, every dollar donated through text giving this weekend is going to go to the sheepfold. So if you want to do that, you can do that right now. If I get a little boring in the message today, you just like want to whip out your phone and say, hey, I'll do it a little bit later, go ahead and do it then. Whenever you want to do it, or if you want to do it later, you can be able to do that. Some of you have already seen the movie. I get it. That's okay. Maybe you'll take the $10 and say, hey, I'll take the $10 to do something for a good cause as well. Okay, so that's available today. And let me just say this. The sexual revolution of our day, it's not new in the sense that people have never crossed these boundaries before. Any study of ancient culture like Rome or Greece or even biblical times will reveal that today's sexual revolution, it's just a rehash of sexual behaviors that happen in the historical world as well as the modern world. Now, here's what's different currently right now, though, when it comes to our sexual revolution in the United States. One is modern communication. They didn't have Twitter and Facebook, and they couldn't get it out as fast and promote and talk about it as much. The second is the emphasis on women and women's fantasies when it comes towards sex. That's something kind of new. As a matter of fact, the largest section of pornography that's growing right now is amongst millennial women. Women born between 1980 and 2000. They are the target market right now for those that are putting together, trying to make money through pornography. You are the target market. As a matter of fact, that market has quadrupled in the last 3 years. And many people point back to the 50 Shades of Grey being one of the reasons why that market has grown so much right now. Now, today, as we talk about this very difficult subject of what is God's plan for your sexuality, I want to take the next, how much time do I have left here? Oh, it's not even on here. It's saying I got as much time as I want. Awesome, I'll take it all. All right? Hey, here's what I want to do today. This is much bigger than just the, hey, ladies, be a good Christian woman and don't fantasize about sex. This is much bigger than men. Be a good Christian man and don't lust after women. Listen, you've already heard that message. I get it. It hasn't helped. So I want to go a little bit deeper. And what I hope to do in the next 24 minutes and 48 seconds is I hope to lay out a case today. Because here's what you need to recognize and understand. That if you choose to go the world's way sexually, and in marriage, look at whatever you want to look, do whatever you want to do in marriage, there's going to be some benefits that happen when you do this outside of God's plan. You're going to get some short-term benefits. And if that weren't the case, people wouldn't do it. I mean, there is some fulfillment that happens in sin. Otherwise, okay, Satan would never be able to tempt us. So understand, there's going to be some fulfillment, some benefits, but there's also some consequences. What I want to do is I want to reveal some of those consequences today. It's much bigger than like, hey, just don't look, because that's the good Christian thing to do. And I also want to point out that if you choose to go God's way, that there's going to be some benefits that happen, but there's also some consequences as well. And I'm fully aware in this room here today, we got a lot of young people in this room as well. I am fully aware that 20% of you have already checked off and have already said, he's an idiot. What is he thinking? We're not going to see 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, I'm a red-blooded American male. I mean, this is what I do. And I realize 20% of you are there, and I get that. You're not really my target audience today, okay? You're going to tune me out. You already have. I got it. There's 20% of you that are here today as well. That you're already like, I'm going God's way no matter what. I'm saving myself till marriage. Listen, I'm committed to purity in my relationship with my husband and with my wife, and I'm going to go through this daily battle, and that's what I'm pursuing. That's what I'm going after, and 20% of you are there. And you're not really my target audience either. Go God, keep it going. This morning, I want to talk to the 60% that are right in the middle. You're vacillating. You could go either way. And I hope in the next 22 minutes to lay out a case for you to choose to go God's way over the world's way. Now, one pastor, he tells the story of this woman named Jenny who came in to see him. And she was in her early 30s. She had been divorced for 8 years. And she had only been a follower of Jesus for about 6 months. And she sat down with the pastor and she said, I have a question, but it's kind of personal. She said, about sex. Does the stuff in the Bible about sex being only for married people, does that apply to me? Or is that just for teenagers? The pastor was a little stunned, and he knew what he believed, but he wasn't sure how to communicate it. And she saw his hesitancy. So she said, listen, I've been married before. And God expects me to be celibate. She said, from my perspective, not having sex seems a little like an unreasonable expectation. Now this pastor, he knew that she deserved an answer, but he also knew her faith was new, still growing. So just as he was about to launch into his, sex is for married people only sermon to her, this question popped in his mind, and he looked at her. He looked her in the eyes, and he said, let me ask you a question. Has sex outside of marriage, has it made your life better or more complicated? And she dropped her head, and tears began to come down her cheeks, and she forced out the answer, more complicated. And he said, Jenny, that's why God has reserved sex for marriage. Church, you need to recognize that God is not anti-sex. God created sex. Sex was God's idea. I should get an amen right there, okay? I mean, sometimes my preaching's better than your shouting out here today, okay? God created sex. Amen. All right, some better than others. And God is not gray when it comes to this area of sexuality. God is very black and white. And he gives us his plan according to Scripture. And his plan isn't to rob us of joy. And so that we will experience incredible joy in our life. So what are the advantages? What do you gain by remaining pure that's better than what you give up? And here's the answer. I mean, you got to make a choice. So what's my advantages of being pure? You know what you're going to give up. What's my advantages? Here's the big advantage. You gain intimacy. If you choose to go God's way, and you choose to do it God's way, and here's God's way. One man, one woman, one lifetime. In the marriage context. If you choose to do it God's way, you gain intimacy. But if you choose to go outside of God's plan, you are going to lose intimacy. Now some of you say, what is intimacy? And I've heard it said that intimacy is into me. See? Into me. See? Now, I like that because I can remember it. It's like, okay, Shannon, I'm into you, okay? Shannon is into me. But I think that we need even a broader definition. I like what Andy Stanley says, though. I want to go back to that. Andy Stanley says this, purity paves the way to intimacy. So in your marriage, when you are pure and you're drinking from your own well, as Solomon said in Proverbs, it says that purity paves the way for intimacy. When you are single and you are actually waiting to be pure for your future husband, for your future wife, you are paving the way for intimacy. And today I hope parents will take some notes, because you're going to need to answer some of these questions. You're going to need to lay out a framework for saying, okay, for my daughter, well, what are the reasons why? What are the reasons not to? What are you going to gain? What are you going to lose? Okay? Purity paves the way for intimacy. So what is intimacy? Let's look at this broader definition. Intimacy is the joy of you knowing someone fully. You know them physically, you know them emotionally, you know them relationally, you know them emotionally, and you know them sexually. It is the joy of knowing them fully and being known by them fully without the fear of rejection, without guilt, and without shame. That's what intimacy is. It's being known and knowing everything about them and enjoying this relationship together. And purity is what paves the way for intimacy. Now, sexual impurity, it erodes the capacity to experience intimacy. And listen to me, this is a big takeaway right here. Don't miss this point. When you're sexually impure, when you're operating outside the boundaries God created, it consequently diminishes the satisfaction of sex. Because how good your sex life, it depends upon how good your intimacy is. And the better the intimacy, the better the sex. See, what we're truly after isn't sex. What we're truly after is intimacy. It's being known and knowing everything about them and being fully known without any shame, without any guilt, without any feelings of, do I measure up? And how do I measure up compared to the last partner? And all that kind of stuff. You see, so this is what you're truly after. It's after intimacy. Now, I used to be a youth pastor. I was a high school pastor, and I would have this conversation with our teenagers. And when I'd have this conversation, I'd ask the teenagers, say, how many of your parents go to church? Raise your hand. And many of these teenagers would raise their hand. I'd say, how many of you would legitimately say that your parents are truly followers of God? And a few of them would raise their hand. And I'd say, how many of you feel like that your parents are not only followers of God, but they truly love each other? And there would be a few kids that would raise their hand and say, my mom and dad love each other and they love God. And I would tell these teenagers, I'd say, you want to know who's having the best sex? Your parents are, right there. And they would all go, ooh. But that's the truth. And here's why. Because God created sex. He knows how sex works. And He understands that when you are in a right relationship with God, and you are in a right relationship with your spouse, and there's no impurities outside, and you're totally focused on one another, what you have is you have intimacy. And when you get intimacy, you have great sex. But let me tell you something. If you choose to go your own way, it corrodes the intimacy, which corrodes the sexual satisfaction and fulfillment in a relationship. I told you last week, and this is so true, Satan is going to do everything he can to try to tempt you to have sex before you get married. And the reason why is not so that you have sex, okay? He could care less if you have sex. He doesn't want you to have intimacy with your spouse, and he doesn't want you to have intimacy with God. That's really what he's going after. So he's going to do everything he can to try to get you to have sex so that you won't have intimacy, so that he breaks down the relationship. Then watch this. After you get married, Satan is going to do everything he can to tempt you to make sure that you don't have sex after you get married. And you know why? Because he doesn't want you to have intimacy. He hates intimacy. And purity paves the way for intimacy. That's why Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, he said, run from sexual sin. It's the only sin that we're called to run away from. He says, don't pray your way out of it. Just run. Get out of it. Run, Forrest. Run. Run from sexual sin. No other sin. Watch this. This is so key. No other sin clearly affects what? The body, as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin. He doesn't say it's a sin against God here. He says that this isn't about God right now. He says you need to understand what you are giving up when you do this thing the world's way over God's way. It's sin against your own body. And guess what you're going to lose? You're going to lose intimacy. You're going to lose your own satisfaction that you have in your own body to be able to have great sex in the future. I've had conversations with men and women here at Crosspoint that have had affairs. And they've told me, they said, Pastor Brian, we've been able to keep our marriage together, but we still struggle. We still struggle with this connection, and we still struggle with our sex life. What's our struggle? And you know what I tell them? Your struggle is intimacy. It's being known and being fully known without feeling guilt and shame. And the impurity of their sinful action has damaged their ability to be intimate. There's a difficulty knowing and being known without this fear of rejection. Let me explain it like this. Have you ever seen a Maserati? I got a picture of a Maserati. And a Maserati, isn't that a beautiful car? Have you ever seen a Maserati? I mean, I'm from Missouri. I didn't get to see very many of them growing up, but now that I live in Southern California, I get to see some Maseratis now, and I love that. This is a beautiful, powerful, amazing car. If somebody gave me a Maserati, or if somebody gave you a Maserati, you'd take care of it, wouldn't you? How many of you would take it off-roading? You wouldn't take it off-roading, and here's why. Because the content and the wrong context leads to chaos. And sex is a lot like a Maserati. It is a beautiful, wonderful thing. But when the content of sex is outside of the context of the boundaries that God has created, when that happens, there is always chaos that happens. Now, pornography. Listen, sex in our culture has become a god that we worship. You know, there's no telling how much money 50 Shades of Grey is going to bring in. I mean, it's going to bring in a lot of money. Pornography has grown into a $10 billion industry here in the United States. Did you know that in the United States alone, pornography brings in more money than the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, and the NHL all combined? America's favorite pastime isn't baseball. America's favorite pastime is pornography. Every second, over $3,000 is spent in the United States of America on pornography. Pornography, internationally, the revenues are more than $90 billion a year. 9 out of 10 kids between the ages of 8 and 16 have viewed pornography on the internet. If you're a parent, you better take note. Porn accounts for 12% of all internet sites, and the largest consumer category of internet pornography is boys ages 12 to 17 years old. Tim Keller said this: one reason we can burn with seemingly uncontrollable sexual passion is because at that moment, our hearts believe the lie that if we have a great romantic sexual experience, we'll finally feel deeply fulfilled. But the truth of the matter is this: it's not sex that fulfills you. See, you can never get enough sex. What truly fulfills you is intimacy. It's being known and fully known without rejection, without shame, and without guilt. You want to meet listen, singles, you want to meet a guy, you want to meet a girl that you fall in love with and know that you can trust that person completely. You want to share everything that there is to know about you without fear of betrayal or rejection. You want to know that person fully and be fully known by them. What you're after is intimacy. And great sex is a byproduct of maximum intimacy. Singles, purity now paves the way for intimacy later. Those of you that are married, purity in your relationship paves the way for intimacy in your relationship. Now, if you're not a follower of Jesus, listen, you're not going to be held accountable to this. You don't have to do this. This isn't for you. But those of you that are followers of Jesus, you better lean in right now. Because this is what God says to you in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. He says, this is God's will. People come to me and say, what's God's will for my life? What's God's plan? Listen, there are some things that are so specific that is God's will. It's not gray. It's black and white. This is God's will. You don't even have to pray for it. He said, here it is. God's will is for you to be what, church? Holy. To be holy means to set apart. It means you're going to be different. It means that if sexually you decide to go God's way instead of the world's way, you're going to get made fun of. You're going to be different. Like Daniel and the lion's den, they're going to throw you into the fire. That's part of it. You need to be aware of that. That's one of the consequences, is that you're going to be weird. But you know what? I'd rather be weird than be normal today. Because, listen, being normal is being divorced, depressed, discouraged, defeated, suicidal. That's normal. I don't want to be normal, church. I want to be weird. I want to be holy. I want to be different. He says, so stay away from all sexual sin. How much? Then each of you will control his own body. And you've got to control your own body. And the control of your own body is tethered to your holiness. The time that you spend with God. I can do all things through Christ, who gives me strength. It says, and then you live in holiness and honor, not in lustful passion like the pagans who don't know God and his ways. 50 Shades of Grey is going to have a trilogy and more movies, and something else is coming after it. Why? That's the way the pagans work. That's the way it's going to work. Never harm or cheat a Christian brother in this matter by violating his wife. And some of you, you've been cheated on. You understand the effects of what you felt before. God's not down on sex, he's down on pain. And he knows the pain that is experienced because people have been off-roading with their sexual lives. And you understand the pain and the consequence. You watch what happened to your mom. You watch what happened to your dad. You watch what happened to your sister. You watch what happened to your brother. You know the pain. And it says, the Lord avenges all such sins. God sees this, and he hurts with you, and he's angry, and one of these days, they'll give an account for it. As we've so solemnly warned you before, God calls us to live holy lives, not impure lives. Listen, if sex outside of marriage truly fulfills us, here's what they're going to tell you. Have sex, man, because that's where you get fulfilled. That's fun. That's free. That's where you find freedom from. If that were the case, then prostitutes in our culture ought to be the most free, fulfilled people on the planet. But 90% of prostitutes say they were sexually abused as children. 62% of prostitutes report having been raped. 75% of women in escort prostitution have attempted suicide. Hospitals report that 15% of all completed suicides are by female prostitutes. You know where they get started? They get started with dancing. They get started in one thing, and it leads to another thing, that leads to another thing. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24. Here's God's way. He says, this is why a man leaves his father and his mother and is joined to his, what, church? His wife. And the two are united into one. This is a sexual encounter that God's speaking about here. He says that they're united. He says they come together physically. A man and a woman. God's plan. One man, one woman, one lifetime. Through marriage, you leave mom and dad, and you're united sexually together, and you become one. God even designed our bodies to fit together to unite with one another. It was part of his plan. And this united, you change one word in the word united, and it becomes untied. And if you look at most marriages, they're untied. They're not united together. And so, whether you're married or not, I want you to know there's no such thing as casual sex. It's impossible to have casual sex. Because here's what God says. Every time you're united, it's not just physical, it's more to it. And every time you have sex, listen, outside of God's plan, you're going to decrease the significance of sex with your current or your future partner. Why? Because the oneness factor is damaged before it even exists. So let me ask you the 60% question. Are the temporary pleasures derived from sex worth the long-term consequences and complications that it causes? Parents, don't tell your kids that sex is for mature people or ready people or people that are in love. God says sex is for married people. Why? Because sex isn't just physical, it's relational. And it's reserved for a unique, committed, multifaceted relationship of marriage between a man and a wife. And it can be wonderful. It's the intimate experience that God always intended. Now, those of you that are single, not married, listen to me just for a moment, because I grew up in church just like you're growing up in church right now, and I heard messages like this, and I remember that, my first question was this. Okay, then, how far is too far? How far is too far? And here's just a few things that I've learned about how far is too far. The further you go, the faster you go. Every time you move to a new level, your sense of fulfillment, it won't last as long as it did at the previous level. Because desire accelerates. It never slows down. There's the second principle I've learned. The further you go, the further you want to go. It's like food. You're never fully satisfied. Sex is a lot like food in that it's an appetite. And the more you increase it, you increase the capacity and the intensity. You ever try to eat half a dessert? Tough thing to do, isn't it? And the further you go, the harder it is to go back. You know what? God never designed you to go back. God wired you up and designed you to go all the way. He wanted you to go all the way, to be intimate, to enjoy sex with your husband and with your wife, not to stop. He wants you to go all the way. Now, I get it. Listen, I get it. In our culture, people think that the whole idea of how far is too far is like a bogus, ridiculous question. So let me pose it to you. Here's a new question. Singles, how far would you want your future wife to go with the person she dates right before she meets you? How far do you want your future husband to go with the person that he dates right before they meet you? Now, if you need an answer to like how far is too far, I kind of like what James Dobson says. James Dobson, he's from Focus on the Family. Here's what he said. He said, don't pull anything up, don't pull anything down, don't unbutton anything, don't unzip anything, and don't touch anything that sticks out. Now, young ladies, listen to me. Don't fall for the guy who wants to have sex with you, but refuses to marry you. Don't fall for the lie that he loves you, but he doesn't want to marry you. Listen to me closely. That's a sign of selfishness. It's a sign of selfishness. And if he'll be selfish in that arena, I promise you, he'll be selfish in other arenas as well. Now, those of you that are single, some of you are like depressed. It's Valentine's weekend, you're single. You like hate yesterday, you wore black yesterday. So what do I do, Pastor Brian? What do I do? Paul has a word for you that are singles. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, here's what he said. He says, now regarding the questions you asked about in your letter. They asked him a question about sex, is what they asked him. And here's what he said. Yes, it's good to live a celibate life. He said, it's good to be single. Look at me. Here's what Paul said. It's good to be single. Here's why he said it's good to be single. Because you can focus on God. You can give 100% of your attention on God. Those of you that are single, you can focus on God like married people can't right now. You know why? Because marriage is complicated. They got all kinds of kid issues and everything else going on. They're all shaking their heads right now, okay? We'll look at it. They're like bobbleheads around here. Okay? Those of you that are single, listen, you can focus on God right now in a way that married people can't. And Paul says that's a good thing to be able to focus on God in a relationship. Here's what I want to challenge you to do. Be a God chaser. And run after God. Chase after God right now. And as you're chasing after God, look to your right, look to your left. As you're running, and if you see anybody that's attractive over there, grab their hand and say, let's magnify the name of the Lord together. But listen to me. If you're chasing after God and you're running, there's nobody attractive, don't look over your shoulder. Because you'll be tempted to slow down in your chase of God. You'll be tempted to go back. And you'll be tempted to settle. And I promise you it's a mistake. And there are people sitting in this room right now that wish they had an opportunity to hear a message like this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago that would say, I can save you a lot of heartache if you would just keep chasing after God. More important than finding the right person is being the right person. And who you are is who you will attract. So chase after God. Chase after Him. I hear people say, well, He's hot. Well, you want to know what's hot? Somebody that honors, obeys, and trusts God. Honor, obey, trust. That's hot. Because that's what's going to create intimacy in your marriage. Now, married people, let me talk to you in closing. Paul says it's good to live a celibate life, but because there's so much sexual immorality Each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. How romantic, huh? So much sex in our world, you better get married. The husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and the husband gives authority over his body to his wife. Look at me today. Some of you in your marriage relationship, the most spiritual thing you can do is to have sex. Some of you today, because it's been way too long. I thought I'd get a few amens from some men there. They're thinking it, but they're afraid to say it. Seriously, here's what Paul says. Do not deprive each other of sexual relations. Now there's a caveat. There's one reason why you should not have sex. Here's what he says. Unless you both agree to refrain, both agree to refrain from sexual intimacy for a limited time. And here's why. So that you give yourselves more completely to prayer. And afterwards, you should come together again. Why? So Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. God's called me to do a lot of spiritual things. About 3 years ago, he called me to do a 40-day fast. I only did juice and water for 40 days. This is a spiritual experience. He didn't call everybody to do that. He did for us. And you know what? God did some supernatural things in our church during that season through that time. He's called me to do some spiritual things. He's never called me to do that. I pray he never does. I'll leave you with one last story. We got to go. You know how they hunt wolves in Alaska? You know how the Eskimos hunt the wolves? Here's what they do. They take a knife and they dip it in blood. And after they dip it in blood, they'll freeze it, almost like a blood icicle pop. And they'll secure it to the ground. And at night, the wolf will smell out the blood. And the wolf will go to that knife and he will begin to lick that ice, trying to get to the blood. And what happens is that ice, it numbs the wolf's tongue. So he continues to keep licking until finally he gets to the blood. And when he gets to the blood, it excites the wolf and he continues to lick harder and faster. And at that moment, that blade lacerates the wolf's tongue. And then immediately, the wolf begins to feel and taste the warm blood, which excites the wolf even more, and begins to continue to lick and continue to lick and continue to lick until it leads eventually to its own death as it slices its own tongue and bleeds to death. I believe Satan has a very similar plan when it comes to your sexuality. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But Jesus said, I've come that you might have life. And I've come that you might have life more abundantly. What that means is a full life. And when it comes to this area of sexuality, he wants you to have a great sex life, a fulfilling sex life, by doing it God's way over the world's way. It's your choice, church.